Hi. We will be talking about what do theory of mind tests actually measure. This is a 2020 paper um written about like theory of mind. So theory of mind is the capacity to represent another agent's mental states, beliefs, desires, intentions, and knowledge, and to use those representations to explain or predict other behavior. I think the classic definition is actually whether this is a paper in question. The authors here talk about um theory of mind is classically defined as the ability to impute mental states to others and to oneself. So that is the definition. Um, and the whole point of this paper is that they use it like a little liberally. So here it's like the ability, the classic theory of mind is the ability to impute mental states to oneself and others, and the ability to attribute mental states such as emotions, intentions, or beliefs to other persons. So those are like the classic definitions. Um, so here is like the author's concern is that like this term has become an umbrella term over like many distinct abilities. Um, And they talk about two concepts like mentalizing and then non-merging. And these two are the criterions they define that should be satisfied to considered something to have passed classic theory of mind tests. So here, like mentalizing is roughly synonymous with theory of mind in most use cases. So it's, as I said, it's one of the two validity criteria that the users talk about. So a task counts only if success genuinely requires inferring a mental state, not a lower level substitute. So the authors define what lower level substitute means like later. And non-merging here is also one of the other criteria. They coined this term in this paper, and the requirement that a task this is defined as the requirement that a task keeps the participant's own mental state distinct from the target's. So you have your own state and then someone else, so it should be distinct. Um, because it's quite possible for like the self and the other to believe the same thing, and then you can't really necessarily derive a correct answer. And the reason why they have um these terminologies is because I'll explain a little here. Like this is they define like how the term is used. It's like how we represent social cognition. This is one axis, and then potential components of social cognition. This is a second axis, and then how we measure it. So the problem is like term one is like theory of mind, term two would be mind reading, and term three would be empathy. But the problem is these three terms are all assigned to component one, like for example, mental states description to others. So here, like they define it as heterogeneity. The different terms are currently used to refer to the same theoretical constructs, like term one, two, and then three. Um, and then another thing that they say is the testers that are supposed to measure different constructs actually investigate the same component, like measure of term one and a measure of term three. So here, this is measure of term one, and this is a measure of term three. Um, so let me just see. Measure of term one, and then measure of term three. Yeah, so this is measure of term one, and this is measure of term three. You can see here the component mental states description to others. It can also measure like this and then this. So it's like it's not a clean one-to-one mapping. That's what the author is saying. And there's another problem where like the same term can be used to refer distinct constructs. Like term three, empathy can mean like here component one or like component two. Um, right? So component two is like emotional reactivity to another's emotion. So yeah, but you get the idea, right? It's like not clear. Um, just to finish off that thought, tests that are conceived to quantify a particular construct actually measure different components of social cognition. So measures of term one, so this is term one, it should measure theory of mind, but actually, measure of term one, like people can actually get confused with like facial expression categorization is associated with theory of mind, but is actually not. That's what the art authors are arguing. So, it's the authors are saying like, yeah, it's not a clear one-to-one mapping. Um, So I thought it'd be nice to actually define the vocabulary a little bit. So they talk about like an egocentric shortcut, like answering what would I think or feel in this situation instead of modeling the other person. The paper frames this as like a failing to switch from an egocentric perspective. They don't like necessarily talk about this. They talk about this in page 387 and describes visual accessibility tests as relying on egocentric processes. And then non-merging like exists to block this. So this is like one of the ways where people like fail the theory of main like an unclear theory of mind task could fail on. Um, and then this is an important process where like if you're involved with any lower level processes, they don't really consider it valid like theory of mind. Another paper termed it as like submentalizing. This is like associative learning, perceptual recognition, categorization, simple perspective cues, and these let a, a participant pass a theory of mind task without representing a mental state. So the authors really place a strong emphasis on that. So the central argument is like there's a strong terminological problem. The vocabulary of social cognition, theory of mind mentalizing empathy is used loosely and interchangeably. Um, and there's another measurement problem where most classic theory of mind tasks lack specificity. The majority of them do not require the participant to represent another's mental state, and sometimes not any mental state at all. So, and the problem with that is like they can pass by lower level processes. So, like it's quite what this author is arguing is like what the field reports as theory of mind finding is actually really not theory of mind. So, the two criteria, as I mentioned, is like mentalizing and non-merging. The requirement is like success must depend on inferring a mental state. And then what this rules out is passing via perception, association, or categorization, which is lower level processes, like right here, right? Associative learning, perceptual recognition, categorization, simple perspective cues. So you have these. So a theory of mind, you should design a theory of mind test so you can all pass it with these. That's what it's saying. And non-merging is like, yeah, you have self and others' mental state that actually differ. And you can pass this by an egocentric shortcut. Like, what would I think? So merging, is when the examples they give is like when we watch a movie, we project ourselves onto the character and experience their intentions and emotions at the first person level. Um, they say like sometimes losing contact with reality, we may end up primed to act congruently and thus pass the theory of mind test without ever distinguishing our own mental state from the characters. Like that is merging. Non-merging is the distinction the criterion requires. So when facing a big spider with my partner, I know that both of us are scared, but I also know that each of us have our own qualitative and quantitative experience of fear. Um, so here the two states are shared, yet held apart. So sharing a state is not as is the same as representing the other state as distinct from yours, and keeping that distinction is what non-merging demands. So yeah, it's still having this distinction. Um, so it's saying like sharing a state is not enough. That is what it's saying. So in the table here, they list a lot of like classic theory of mind tests. And then they have the task description, and then like does it pass these two criteria? And you can there's like four possibilities. You can either be like yes, 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 no, no, yes, right? And then no, there's a I don't maybe there is no no yes and no no. Yeah. So I instead of like listing all of it, I thought it actually be really helpful if I have um three cases so we can like dive into that. Um so table one, yes, yes. It's either false belief. It's called the false belief Salian test. It's a classic one where Sally um yeah, you guys know this experiment. It's really famous. The participant infers the belief of a person who holds a false belief, right? About a scene that the participant sees correctly. Right, because like Sally and Anne um, are capable of inferring who believes what. So a mental state was inferred. So you have Sally's belief, and the lower level shortcut gives the wrong answer. For example, if you just read off the perceptually available fact, the marble is in the box, because you remember like the marble is moved halfway, and then one of the participants actually has asked, where does a marble exist? You could answer box and fail. So just to give a refresher, what a lower level process would involve is like associative learning or perceptual recognition. So if you use like perceptual recognition to identify where the ball is, you would fail. And self here is like the participant who watched and moved the marble and knows the truth. Other is like Sally, whose belief is false, right? So you have, um, yeah. And then the other thing, the second experiment that I thought was interesting to talk about would be yes, no. Yes being like then the yes to the mentalizing criterion and no to the non-merging one. So here this is called the description of intention from previous rational action. It's on page 387. So just to describe you guys, and you might not know because this is not as famous, it's participants get an open-ended story involving an agent and select a suitable ending. So it's also part of the paper. So the mentalizing part is satisfied because the participant represent this agent want to grasp that item. So you can attribute a mental state or an intention to the agent. But this is like the non-margin part failed because this distinction is essential. So there's no evidence that the participant distinguished their own intentions from the agents. This is actually word for word from the paper. So the self is a participant and the other is like the story's agent. So it's not really clear there's a clear divide between the participant and the story's agent. And no, no is like not really interesting, so I'm not gonna like really go into that. Just to summarize the main points here is the field's core problem is a lack of specificity. Tasks labeled as theory of mind often measure lower level processes instead. Two criteria, the mentalizing and the non-merging criteria separate general theory of mind tasks from imposters. And this is what they were talking about in the paper. I didn't have time to like really talk about it, but here, like, there are three inference types that are especially poorly served by current tasks: visual accessibility judgments, emotion description, intention description. So you can read about it here, actually, in the paper. So if you go here, this is the, yeah, visual accessibility judgments, um, emotion description, and intention description tasks. Um, And the paper diagnoses more than it actually cures. It just says like this is a problem. It doesn't really give like strong solutions, but like in page 3891 to 392, the proposed path forward is greater ecological validity. The gold standard they suggest is like the director tasked by Wu and Kesar. It's had interactive paradigms because it's complementary rather than mirrored responses, and this naturally keeps self and other distinct. So what they talk about here is in the mirrored response is it says like you should avoid mirrored response. Um, oh yeah, here, Wu and Kesar. So here, when facing a character, in the present case, outcome the recommendation to examine first-person engagement is that such a paradigm would also allow the affirmation limits on most classic theories of mind. Um, and here, this is like and as underlined by Barceló, our social interactions require significantly more complementary actions than mirrored actions. So, for example, when facing a character expressing anger, most participants experience fear, not anger. So when facing a character throwing a ball, then participants are primed to catch, not to throw the ball. Therefore, their own mental states differs that from the observed characters, even though they will have correctly inferred their emotion or intention. So you can either design the experiment to either mirror it or not mirror it. So you have to be careful about that. That's what this paper is saying. That's, I think, pretty much all I had to say. I will post this and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.